The underestimated. Part 1. The fall. I never saw the knife coming until it was lodged firmly between my shoulder blades. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Elena, we're restructuring the department, Michael said with practiced sympathy, his manicured fingers steepled on the polished mahogany desk that I'd helped him earn. I'm afraid your position has been recalibrated. Recalibrated. What a sterile word for decimation. I don't understand, I said, though I understood perfectly. The quarterly reports spread across his desk. My reports, my analyses, were about to become someone else's victory. 3 years of building the financial analysis division from nothing, of 14-hour days and canceled vacations. 3 years of loyalty to Meridian Capital Partners. The board feels we need fresh perspectives at the director level, Michael continued. His eyes flickered to his computer screen. Already moving on, already dismissing me. Derek will be taking over the division effective immediately. We're offering you a senior analyst position under him. Derek, my protege, the man I'd personally trained and mentored for the past 18 months. A demotion, I clarified, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. You're demoting me to work under the person I hired and trained. Michael had the decency to look uncomfortable, though not uncomfortable enough to change course. Elena, be reasonable. We're keeping you on the team. Many would be grateful. For being robbed of their accomplishments. I finished for him. For watching someone else claim credit for their work? He sighed. The sound of a man burdened by having to explain simple realities to lesser minds. This is business, not personal. Derek has connections the firm needs, and frankly, his presentation style is more compatible with the board's expectations. Translation. Derek played golf with the right people, laughed at the right jokes, and most importantly, wasn't a woman in her 40s who refused to soften her expertise with self-deprecation and flirtation. I stood up, straightening my charcoal gray suit jacket. I see. When should I clear out my office? Human resources will help you transition over the next 2 weeks, he replied, already reaching for his phone. Oh, and Elena? The compensation adjustment will take effect immediately. I nodded, turned, and walked out with my spine straight and my head high. I didn't allow myself to cry until I reached the sanctuary of my apartment that evening. A glass of Cabernet in one hand, and my severance package in the other. The tears weren't just for my career. They were for my foolishness. For believing that excellence would shield me from politics. For trusting Michael, who I'd once considered a mentor and friend. As I stared out at the Chicago skyline from my living room window, something hardened inside me. Not my heart. I wouldn't give them that victory, but my resolve. They thought they knew me. They thought I would accept the humiliation, take the demotion, and fade obediently into the background. They had drastically underestimated me. I picked up my phone and made a call to an old friend from business school, who had been trying to recruit me for years. Vivian, it's Elena Reyes. Is that consulting offer still on the table? Part 2. The strategy. Are you absolutely sure about this? Vivian Chen asked, studying me across her immaculate glass desk. Turning down a partnership track to go independent is a risk, especially after what happened at Meridian. 3 months had passed since my recalibration. I'd joined Vivian's consulting firm as a senior advisor, accepted a substantial pay cut, and worked twice as hard to re-establish my reputation. I'd also spent every spare moment researching, planning, and preparing for what I was about to propose. I'm sure, I replied. And I'm not asking you to fund my revenge fantasy, Viv. I'm presenting you with a business opportunity. She raised an eyebrow. That happens to target your former employer. That happens to target an underserved market segment that Meridian is currently monopolizing and mismanaging. I corrected, sliding a folder across to her. Small to mid-sized tech companies getting squeezed out of traditional financing options. Female and minority-owned businesses being overlooked. There's a massive opportunity here, and I have the roadmap to capture it. Vivian opened the folder, her skepticism gradually transforming into interest as she flipped through my analysis. These projections are aggressive. They're realistic, I countered. I know Meridian's blind spots because I reported on them for years, only to have my recommendations ignored. They're so focused on their whale clients that they're neglecting an entire ecosystem of emerging businesses. She looked up. And your plan is, what? To poach their smaller clients. My plan is to build something better. I leaned forward. A boutique financial advisory firm specializing in next-generation companies. More personalized service, more innovative financing solutions, and a genuine commitment to clients they consider too small to prioritize. With you as the founder and CEO, Vivian stated, not a question. With your firm as my primary backer and strategic partner, I replied. You get equity in a high-growth venture and referral pathways for clients who outgrow my services. I get to build something meaningful on my own terms. Vivian closed the folder, but her fingers remained on it, tapping thoughtfully. And what happens when Michael and Derek realize what you're doing? I smiled. They'll underestimate me. Again. And that's exactly what I'm counting on. For weeks later, Aurora Financial Partners was born, named for my grandmother Aurora, who had taught me that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising every time you fall. I rented a modest office space in downtown Chicago, launched a website highlighting my expertise without mentioning Meridian by name, and began the painstaking work of building a business from scratch. The first 6 months were brutal. 18-hour days, constant networking, cold calls that went nowhere, and the gnawing fear that I'd made a catastrophic mistake. My savings dwindled. My confidence wavered. Then came Jamie Whitson, founder of a promising medical technology startup. She'd been brushed off by 3 major financial firms, including Meridian. They told me my projections were unrealistic, she explained during our first meeting. That my valuation expectations needed to be more grounded. One advisor actually suggested I find a male co-founder to balance the team. I reviewed her business plan, asked penetrating questions, and identified both strengths and legitimate concerns. Your growth model is ambitious but defensible. Your valuation target is reasonable given comparable companies in your sector. And your leadership is your strength, not your weakness. Jamie signed with Aurora the next day. Within 2 months, I'd secured her first round of funding, at a valuation 15% higher than her target. She referred 3 other founders to me. They referred others. My client list grew steadily, primarily through word of mouth. I hired my first 2 employees, brilliant financial analysts who had also been sidelined at larger firms for not fitting the preferred mold. 1 year after my recalibration, Aurora Financial Partners was managing advisory services for 28 clients with a combined portfolio value exceeding $140 million. Small by Meridian standards, but remarkable for a startup firm with minimal marketing. I knew we were making waves when an industry newsletter ran a profile of Aurora titled, The Disruptor's Advisor, highlighting our success with non-traditional clients. I didn't mention Meridian or my history there, focusing instead on our philosophy and results. The article caught attention. A week later, I received a LinkedIn message from Derek. Impressive work with Aurora. Let's catch up over coffee sometime. I didn't respond. Strategic silence can speak volumes. Part 3. The Confrontation. Elena Reyes? There's someone here to see you. My assistant Maya's voice carried a note of tension through the intercom. 2 years into Aurora's existence, unscheduled visitors were unusual. We'd moved to larger offices overlooking Millennium Park, expanded to a team of 11 professionals, and developed a client waiting list that allowed us to be selective. Who is it? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Michael Hargrove from Meridian Capital. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent. I smiled to myself. Right on schedule. Give me 2 minutes, then show him in. I used those 2 minutes strategically, arranging the latest industry awards on my credenza, pulling up our most recent client success story on my monitor, and centering the Financial Times feature on my coffee table. The one discussing Aurora's innovative approach to financing women-led startups. When Michael walked in, I greeted him with professional courtesy, neither warm nor cold. Michael, this is unexpected. He looked older, the confidence in his stride slightly diminished. Elena, you've done well for yourself. Thank you. What brings you to Aurora? He settled into a chair across from me, eyes scanning my office, taking in the views, the tasteful decor, the subtle symbols of success. I'll be direct. We've noticed you've acquired several clients that were previously with Meridian. Have I? I kept my expression neutral. We don't typically ask our clients about their previous advisory relationships. 7 former Meridian clients in the past quarter alone, he countered, including Verotech, which had been with us for over a decade. I shrugged lightly. Clients make decisions based on their needs and experiences. I'm sure you understand that better than most. His jaw tightened. Are you deliberately targeting our client base? Aurora serves an underrepresented market segment, I replied, echoing the very words I'd once used in reports to him. If some of those clients previously felt underserved at Meridian, that's hardly my responsibility. This isn't just business, Elena. This feels personal. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. When you demoted me and gave my division to Derek, you told me it wasn't personal, just business. I'm simply taking that lesson to heart. A flush crept up his neck. Derek's leadership has been challenging. The division hasn't performed as expected. How unfortunate. We'd like to discuss bringing you back, he said abruptly. As a senior partner, with equity compensation in your own division, larger than before. I couldn't help but laugh, not cruelly, but with genuine amusement. You're offering me a job? Now. Meridian recognizes talent, Elena. Sometimes belatedly, I admit. But we want to make things right. I stood up and walked to the window, giving myself a moment to absorb the full circularity of this moment. 3 years ago, I gave you a detailed analysis of emerging market opportunities that Meridian was overlooking. You dismissed it as too speculative. 2 years ago, I built a division that increased firm revenues by 22%. You handed it to someone else and offered me a demotion. I turned back to face him. Now that I've proven my analysis was correct by building a successful company around it, you want me to abandon that company and return to Meridian? With significant compensation, he added quickly. And a board seat. Michael, I said gently. I'm not interested in returning to Meridian, but I am open to discussing a different type of relationship. His expression brightened. Such as? Aurora is considering expansion. We're evaluating potential acquisitions to accelerate our growth. Smaller firms with complementary capabilities, but perhaps outdated leadership. The implication hung in the air between us. His expression froze. You can't be serious. Aurora acquiring Meridian? We're 10 times your size. Today, yes, I acknowledged. But your last 3 quarterly reports showed declining revenues and client attrition. Your financing round last month fell short of targets. And I happen to know that 3 of your major clients are currently evaluating alternative advisors. His face paled. How do you know that? The same way I know that the board is questioning Derek's leadership and your judgment in promoting him. I sat back down, maintaining steady eye contact. Information is valuable, Michael. So is reputation. Both can change rapidly in this industry. Is that a threat? It's an observation, and potentially an opportunity, depending on your perspective. I slid a folder across the desk, a mirror of my meeting with Vivian 2 years earlier. This outlines a potential strategic partnership between Aurora and Meridian's small-cap division. Not an acquisition, but a collaborative venture that would benefit both firms. He stared at the folder without opening it. Why would I even consider this? Because Aurora's client acquisition rate is double industry average. Because our ROI metrics outperform Meridian's in every category for comparable clients. And because, I added softly, you need a win with the board right now. I watched the calculations happen behind his eyes. Pride versus pragmatism, ego versus survival. Take the proposal, I said, nodding toward the folder. Review it with your team. The terms are fair, and the benefits mutual. I'm not interested in revenge, Michael. I'm interested in building something meaningful. After he left, Maya came in with a questioning look. How did it go? I smiled. Exactly as anticipated. They'll counteroffer, we'll negotiate, and eventually we'll structure a deal that strengthens Aurora while giving Meridian a face-saving narrative. And Derek will likely find himself recalibrated, I replied. But that's not my concern. Part 4. The Ascent. Which is why I'm honored to accept the Financial Women's Association's Entrepreneur of the Year award. I concluded, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all attentive. When I founded Aurora Financial Partners 5 years ago, I didn't set out to disrupt an industry. I simply wanted to create the company I wished had existed when I needed it most. The applause was gratifying, but it wasn't what moved me to the edge of tears. It was seeing my team, now 38 strong, cheering from 2 full tables. It was the presence of clients who had become friends and advocates. It was the journey from that devastating afternoon in Michael's office to this moment of vindication. As I made my way back to my seat, I spotted a familiar face at a corner table, Derek, looking uncomfortable in formal attire, nursing a drink alone. Our eyes met briefly. I nodded politely. He returned the gesture with visible reluctance. After my recalibration, Derek had indeed enjoyed a meteoric rise at Meridian, followed by an equally spectacular fall when the division's performance plummeted. The partnership between Aurora and Meridian's small-cap division, eventually structured as a joint venture with Aurora as the managing partner, had preserved many jobs but not his. Last I'd heard, he was working at a mid-tier firm in Milwaukee. Quite the full-circle moment, observed Vivian, who'd become not just a business partner but a close friend. Does it feel as good as you imagined? I considered the question carefully. It feels different. Less about winning and more about building. She smiled knowingly. The best revenge isn't just success. It's creating success on your own terms. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I stepped onto the hotel balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. Chicago sparkled below, the same skyline I'd gazed at tearfully 5 years ago. My phone buzzed with notifications, congratulatory messages, press inquiries about Aurora's newly announced expansion to Boston and Austin, a reminder about tomorrow's meeting with potential West Coast investors. The business was thriving beyond my initial projections, with a client portfolio now valued at over $1.2 billion. But the notification that caught my attention was a LinkedIn message from a former Meridian analyst. Watching your journey has inspired me to finally start my own consulting practice. Any advice for a nervous first-time entrepreneur? I smiled and began typing a response, remembering my own fear and determination in those early days. The betrayal that had once defined my story had transformed into merely the opening chapter of a much greater narrative. One that I was still writing, on my own terms, with my own voice. The knife that had been lodged in my back had become the tool that carved my path forward. And for that, ironically, I was grateful. As I looked up at the night sky, I whispered a thank you to my grandmother Aurora, whose wisdom had proven true once again. True strength lies not in never falling, but in rising every time you fall. And rise I had, higher than anyone, especially those who had underestimated me, could have possibly imagined. The end.